parents, teachers, guardians, and mentors. We can all agree you've got big shoes to fill, and it may feel like they're always getting bigger and more daunting. Welcome to Parenting Adventures, where we aim to be a beacon of support and knowledge for those navigating the complexities of parenting. Each episode, we bring on experts to walk us through the most pressing issues facing families, with evidence-based, practical strategies. And if school struggles are part of the puzzle, check out how Tutor Teach can help. Now, let's dive into the episode.
Do you ever wonder how to raise a child who genuinely loves reading and keeps loving it even as screens and distractions pull for their attention? I'm your host, Lara Courtepatte, and today on Parenting Adventures, we're joined by Tanya Lloyd Kyi, an award-winning Canadian author with more than 35 fiction and nonfiction books for children and teens under her belt. Tanya's curiosity about the world has taken her from writing about penguins to popcorn and everything in between. She's currently teaching at the University of British Columbia's School of Creative Writing and continues to create stories that inspire kids to think big and feel deeply. In this episode, Tanya shares her own journey into the world of reading and writing and why storytelling is such a powerful tool for helping children process emotions, understand the world around them, and develop critical thinking skills. We talk about how parents can make books more appealing in a screen-filled world, why some kids lose interest in reading as they grow, and what we can do to help them rediscover the magic of stories. Tanya also shares how books can build confidence, create a community, and ignite a sense of purpose in young readers, encouraging them to take risks, dream big, and maybe even change the world. If you're looking for ways to make reading a lifelong love in your home, this is an episode you won't want to miss. Tanya, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Can you start by sharing a bit about your background and what first sparked your own love of reading and storytelling?
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here. I have been a reader since I was a little kid. I grew up in a very small town in BC, in the Kootenays, and we didn't have a library nearby or a bookstore, but my dad would go to these auctions and he'd bring back boxes of books, and he just bought the boxes like sight unseen. So sometimes they'd be full of children's books, sometimes they'd be full of old encyclopedias or time life books or westerns or romances, and I would read whatever he brought home. So I wound up with this wide diversity of reading loves. And when I was in grade 11, we had a new teacher librarian at our school who started a creative writing course. I was one of 4 people who signed up for the course. 2 of them were these guys who wrote all Dungeons and Dragons inspired fantasy with rats and caves and things. And one was a girl who wrote all poems about breaking up with her boyfriends in the rain. And I was the 4th, and I wrote a little bit of everything, the same as I was reading, but I loved it. And by the end of 2 years with her taking creative writing, I knew that that was what I wanted to do.
That is such an awesome story and such like a humble story where your dad went and encouraged your literacy and didn't know if you would love it or hate it, and you just went into it blindly, and you were able to see different styles of writing, which makes you a better writer, and then the writing makes you a better reader, and that your school even encouraged creative writing. That's fantastic.
Yeah, she was an amazing teacher.
I always say that we all have that teacher that inspires something in us, whether it's our career path or whatnot. Like for me, same thing. Mine was an English teacher, and he told me, whatever you do, make sure you're writing. And I ended up getting my Bachelor of Arts with a heavy emphasis in writing. And it was those words. Like, these teachers don't know how much of an impact they're having on us, where they just say something so fleeting in their minds, but so impactful for us as students.
It's so true. Yeah, it's so true.
Wow, that's great. So where are you now in your career and journey with creative writing?
I have published about 35 books for kids. So some of those are fiction, middle grade novels, YA novels. Some of them, I write quite a bit of like pop science for 8 to 12-year-olds. And then I've written a few picture books. My most recent books are The City of Lost Cats, which is a middle grade novel about these cats who team up with a girl to save an old mansion from destruction. And a picture book called Bompa's Insect Expedition, which was written with David Suzuki. So it's all about taking his grandkids, his real grandkids are in the book, and it's about taking them looking for insects and learning about insects. So that was really fun. And I teach for the last 4 years. I've taught creative writing for children at the University of British Columbia.
That's amazing. David Suzuki, though, he's like Canadian royalty.
He's pretty fun to talk to. We do a lot of brainstorming before we're just actually finishing up the second book in the series. We do a lot of brainstorming before each book, and he's just so enthusiastic about anything that has to do with nature. And he knows so much that I just spend all the time scribbling frantically.
So, why is storytelling so important for young children? How does it shape the way they see the world, process emotions, and even develop problem solving and critical thinking skills?
Yeah, there's so much research on this, and most of the research is on early children's books and vocabulary, which I think most people expect. If you're reading more books, you're using more words. Often as parents, we're walking around saying, wash your hands and take your shoes off, and we say the same words dozens of times a day. And then you pick up a book and you're reading the armadillo and the octopus went dancing in the starlight, and all of a sudden you're using way different words than you use in your daily life. So there's a big part of that vocabulary building. And a lot of the vocabulary building also comes as you talk about the book. So it's not just reading the words in the book, but you're saying things like, why is that octopus using an umbrella, do you think? And then the child is answering. So you're having these conversations about the book. And research shows that parents and children having those conversations use a much broader type of vocabulary than they do in their everyday interactions. But beyond that, reading stories and absorbing sort of the structure of those stories in picture books helps kids learn to tell their own stories. It helps them learn to tell other people about events that have happened in their lives. You've probably had a conversation with a 3-year-old and you say, what did you do this morning? And they go off on this long, meandering, winding story with no point. But then when you ask a 5-year-old, what did you do this morning? They actually can tell you the story where this is where we went, this is what happened, this is what was really exciting, and this is how it ended. And they learn that narrative structure through picture books. And it also helps them imagine things that are going to happen in the future. So once they know how to spot sort of those narrative arcs, then they can predict events that are going to happen to them coming up as well.
Interesting. And children are so inquisitive by nature. And so if there's a word that they don't quite know, they will do what it takes to figure out what that word means and pronounce it properly. And like you said, it's not a word possibly that's used in day-to-day language, but them being able to incorporate it into a sentence contextually at some point is a moment for them. And books, like, it really brings upon that imagination that's kind of getting lost right now. And when you describe the 5-year-old telling about their day, you can almost just see their eyes rolling back in their head and really looking at the story of their day in a very meticulous way, I guess you could say, imaginative way. You can see the wheels turning. And I don't know if parents or myself even would relate that to literature, but it makes perfect sense that they're trying to captivate their audience just like a book would.
Yeah, and that is tied in with creating their own stories too, which follow the same arc but have maybe more imaginative elements. And the other thing that you just reminded me of is children are so naturally playful with language too. And in picture books, especially picture books with lots of wordplay, it's fun. It's there because it's fun to read aloud, but it's also showing kids how words work with little blocks of sound and how we can play with those blocks of sound. The technical name for that is phonological awareness. But they're learning to play with language and learning how different parts of language work together as well.
How do you think that plays into children who learn more than one language at a time and they're reading their French or Spanish and English books at the same time?
Isn't it shockingly impressive how quickly kids can learn to do that?
It's insane.
Yeah, this is not part of my professional experience, but personally, the children I've had around me who speak one language and are learning a second, or who are learning to read in 2 languages at once, sometimes it takes them a little bit longer because their brain has to sort through twice as much information. But then they get it, and then they're better than the rest of us at both. I wish I could take my own brain back to a 5-year-old state and make it learn a few more languages.
Yeah, there's no harm in learning more than one language, that's for sure. I know when I was brought up in both languages in tandem. I don't recall knowing one without the other. And my kids are the same way. And it's interesting because they learned formally French educationally, but because of like you said, the phonological awareness that they've gained in their French, they're able to transfer that into the English and pull out those root sounds and transfer them. So they're able to pick up the English pretty quickly from a reading perspective because of the French foundation that they've grown. And it would go the same as the opposite. Like if it was English was their first educational exposure, they would be able to pick up the French at a young age with those phonics and whatnot.
Yeah, it's impressive.
Absolutely. So a lot of parents want to raise book-loving kids, but screens and other distractions may make reading feel a little bit of a tough sell. So what are some practical ways parents can make books more appealing at home?
It's such a good question and something that I think every parent is struggling with right now. We had a bit of an advantage raising my son because, and this doesn't sound like an advantage, in general it was not, but he got really bad migraines. So we had very strict screen time rules. It was 30 minutes a day of some sort of screen and no more. So he was forced to turn to books and audiobooks. And even though, maybe that sort of limit is not enforceable, I do think that we as parents have to put limits on the screen time and let kids be bored. Like let them wander around the house complaining about how they're bored and refuse to give them other things to do until they finally pick up a book out of desperation and find out that they actually like it.
What did we do when we were kids? I mean, we were bored all the time because we didn't have those options. And look at how that shaped the way that we think.
Yeah. But I also think making as many books available as you can is great. Like, don't keep all the books on a bookshelf in the bedroom. Put a few on the coffee table, put a few on the end table, put a few on the kitchen table, so that as they're wandering around, if they stop to pick up a graphic novel or something, maybe they get absorbed. And also making trips to the library like a weekly event and a fun event, so they're getting to choose what they're interested in reading. And even if they don't finish all the books, even if they take them home and they sample a few of them, that is still them, reading at least parts of stories, absorbing the language, getting some vocabulary, and figuring out what kind of stories they like to read, which is part of all of our evolution as a reader.
Absolutely. I know for us, we try and incentivize reading at our house. So we require 15 minutes of reading a day after a school day because they've been doing reading through the school day. And so it's something that's not school related, though. Any type of book, like you said, something that just piques their interest and lets them think outside the box and dig into their own interests. And it doesn't seem like a big battle because it's not a daunting amount of time they're young. But just enough to kind of get them into it. I'm noticing that they're just picking it up on their own now. I don't even need to suggest it because it's become part of their day.
That's great. That's great. And it gives them some downtime. Like, school is stressful sometimes, and to come and have that quiet time at home can be respite time as well as learning. And I also think one thing we can do as parents too is keep reading with our kids and to our kids, even when they're old enough to read on their own. That even if they're old enough to read on their own doesn't mean that they don't want to cuddle up beside you on the couch and read something together.
Definitely. I agree with that approach as well. Some kids start off loving books but seem to lose interest as they get older. Why do you think that happens, and what can parents do to reignite that spark?
Yeah, it's tricky. Our kids are busy too, right? So some of it is that they don't have that much time and they're tired. I had a really interesting conversation recently with a friend who was saying, "Oh, the teacher says my son really needs to catch up in reading." And her son was a huge basketball player, like it was basketball every day. And he's really got to catch up in reading. So I've been trying every day before bed to read to him. But I asked what she was reading to him, and it was these quite dense, emotional novels. I was like, maybe that's not what he wants to read. Like, get him some nonfiction, get him a biography of a basketball star, get him the Guinness Book of World Records. I think there's so many options for reading out there. And some of us, when we think reading, we automatically think novels. But reading can be graphic novels, reading can be audiobooks. You get all the vocabulary from an audiobook that you would get from reading text. You get all the learning about narrative structure from an audiobook. The only thing you don't get is some of the punctuation, and they're going to get that other places. So I think if kids are resistant to reading, things like graphic novels, nonfiction, audiobooks are great places to go. I would also ask, if people are saying, my kids have lost interest in reading, when was the last time you read a book, and was it right before bed? because I think a lot of times as adults, we are also busy, don't have that much time to read in the day. And the reading we are doing, we're doing before bed when the kids don't see it. So model reading, like sit down for half an hour with a cup of coffee and a book and model the reading. And if your kids are wandering around and they're asking you things and they're bored, you can say, actually, I'm reading right now. Why don't you get a book and come sit beside me? I'm going to read until 4:30.
That's great. Yeah, modeling is an important part of it. And like you said, reading doesn't have to be done just through books. I know when we're driving and the kids are reading the signs on the side of the road, or when they read the labels on the cereal box or on, condiments and stuff, like, like it's smart, like that they're drawn to that language in different ways, and not just in the conventional open a book and read, but they're drawing it out of different products. And when you go through the store and there's aisles that have what's in the aisle at Home Depot, and they're like, okay, this one's lumber. And, so you see that brain movement happening and that literacy happening in unexpected ways.
Yeah, there was an interesting little movement here in Vancouver a few years ago to label the items in playgrounds with the words so that the slide would say slide. Yeah, and it sort of fell off, but for a while they were doing it. It was really interesting. Yeah. One of the things, if people have children who are really resistant to reading, who really don't want to, I think joke books are a great place to start. And the downside is that you are going to be followed around by a small child reading you jokes for an hour. But there's such a good reward to reading jokes because then you get to tell the jokes.
I also think books like Where's Waldo or Spot the Differences and things like that, even though they're not words, they still have the act of sitting down with a book in front of you. It's eyes on a page and kind of sorting through problem solving and critical thinking and things like that. So maybe for the resistant reader, it's still maybe a pathway into reading is through those kind of activity books.
It's true. And more, our world requires a lot of visual decoding. We're bombarded by advertisements. We're spending a lot of time on the internet. There's a lot of trying to sort through visual information and figure out what's important. So books like that, and also things like graphic novels, can really help kids learn to do that.
In your Writing to Change the World presentation, you talk about people who take risks and achieve great things. How can books inspire kids to dream big and develop the confidence to follow through?
It's true, both in my fiction, in my novels, and in my nonfiction. I just love telling the stories of kids who've managed to make big changes in their communities. There's a professor at Ohio State University named Rudine Sims Bishop, who is very famous for coming up with this concept called windows and mirrors, and saying that kids need books to act as windows and kids need books to act as mirrors. So that if you are reading a book and it's about someone like you, then it's like seeing yourself in a mirror and you're like, oh, you feel a sense of identity. If you're reading a book and it's about someone who lives a completely different life than you, then it's like looking through a window and getting a little glimpse of what it's like to be in someone else's life. And both of those are equally important for kids, and they build awareness of other people, they build empathy between us, but also books are about characters taking control over their lives. Like by definition, a main character is someone who is affecting the outcome of the story. They are active, they have agency, they're doing things. And when we have active characters making changes in their communities, whether they're characters like us or characters who are in different parts of the world doing different things, that's inspiring to kids. And I think it really shows them that change is possible. The world it's not a surprise to kids that the world has some big problems. They're not immune to the news and to the internet. They know that there are some big things wrong with the world. And they also know that grownups don't have all the answers. And I think reading stories of kids who are actively changing things can be really inspiring for them.
Honestly, this is going to age me a little, maybe just a little, but this reminds me of when I was a child reading The Babysitter's Club. And because I was so little and they seemed older to me, and they probably weren't that much older than me in the end, but they came together as a group of girls and they started this business, this enterprise of, we're all going to come together and babysit these kids. And and they had a treasurer and they had this whole system. And without even knowing it, it may have sparked that entrepreneurial mind in me, or at least that girls work well together, or they can have conflict-free corporate relations, or however you want to look at it. But that's not how I was thinking when I was 8. But just in hindsight, and you're right, like those are the mountain movers that are not real characters, but they become real to you, and they impact what you want to do. Like, I mean, for me, maybe I would have started a babysitters club or something along those lines because of that book. And so even these books, they really do make movements in a child's brain without even being conscientious of it.
So true. And those are great books. And it doesn't date you because there's a whole new series of Babysitter Club books out that are graphic novels. So kids can still read the Babysitters Club.
Maybe I'll have to grab a few of those.
Yeah.
I recently had a little girl, and so I'm sure that'll be her destiny one day. But it's true, those books were impactful. And one of my favorite books as a child was The Outsiders, like probably my favorite book. And it really showed a different time. It showed how people grew up differently, and the freedoms or not freedoms that they had, the economic statuses, things like that. It was a world unleashed that I was not familiar with. And so I really like what you just said. It does. It's these characters that really change the world.
Yeah, and it's interesting, both of the books that you've chosen are books where it's really a collection of characters working together to change their community or change the world. And I was reading some research recently on climate education. And when we're telling people to do individual actions, do your recycling, turn off the water when you brush your teeth, it doesn't actually help people's anxieties. But when we're telling them collective actions, like when we're getting them involved in clubs or organizations, and they're doing things together, then they feel much more like they're having an impact. So books like that, where there's strong friends supporting one another and helping one another achieve change, those are great things for kids to be reading.
Especially in today's world where there was a change in that sense of community and friendship. It's shifted. Post-COVID, obviously, is what I'm referring to. And a lot of people became isolated through that, or they had trouble reestablishing friendships that perhaps they let go during that time and whatnot. So being able to even read about it can feel inspirational and act as a compass in your own world, I guess.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So speaking of clubs, how do communities like book clubs or even book talk on TikTok help kids and teens connect more deeply with reading and with each other?
I think we all, when we read a great book, want to tell somebody about it. Also, when we are in search of a great book, it's so nice to have people understand what we like. And for some of us, that is the bookseller who just knows exactly what kind of books you love and is going to give you those sorts of books. But things like book clubs, reading clubs, social media, I mean, I guess they do two things. They connect you with like-minded readers so that you can find the books you know you're going to love. They also introduce you to books that you probably wouldn't have picked up on your own. But if somebody you trust says, whoa, this book blew my mind, then you're way more likely to try that slightly new thing as well. That's, I think, equally true for kids and for adults.
And I think book clubs are a little bit trendy now, where people will say, yeah, I'm going to my book club, and it's got a certain zing to it. It's got a little bit of a feeling to it. And so I think especially, and I'm not trying to genderize this, but just for women to be able to kind of do something for themselves, the moms, the stay-at-home moms and whatnot, I see a lot of those come up on my socials where they're like, this is something for me that nobody can be a part of but me and my book club, and it's special, you know, and it's social, and it removes you from those common roles that you're in and gives you something else. And so I think that's kind of nice to see that it's gotten a little bit of a social nuance to it.
It's true. And those books prompt great discussions in book clubs. Although I have a friend from my book club who is a school principal, and she was talking about her book club just casually at school. And one of the teachers, a male teacher, got jealous and went off and started his own book club.
Well, that's a healthy competition.
Yeah.
It's nice to see people coming together. It's not just about the act of reading. It's how did it emotionally impact you? What did you get out of it? Would you recommend it? It gives everyone a bit of a soapbox and allows them to speak what they thought, but also receive what others thought. And I don't know if we have that opportunity in other scenarios as much.
Yeah, and that ties back to modeling for our kids too. If we're excited about a book and we're coming home talking about the conversations we had about that book, that's great for kids to hear.
Certainly. So for anyone listening wondering where they can find your books and more of your work, where can they do that?
They can, I have a website called TanyaLloydKyi.com, so they can look there, but my books should be available at the local library, at the school library, at your local bookstore, or online.
That's awesome. Well, it sounds like you have some really fun ideas for your writing, and your book that you referenced earlier about cats, I mean, that one's got to be a big one because everyone loves their cats. And I think you hit the nail on the head with that one for sure. But it just sounds like you have such a creative mind and you're able to pour that into your career and speak to young minds with it. That's just such a dream. That's amazing.
I have a really fun job, I have to say.
That's great. And it's so important to love what you do. And it's really obvious to me that you do and that you have a lot of passion for it, and that probably translates in the quality of your work. Thank you so much for sharing not only just a bit about yourself. I love the story that you told us at the beginning about your dad going and getting boxes of random books for you and digging in, and just how you're truly changing the world with your literature and your writing and how you're affecting young minds. And so thank you so much for sharing that with our audience.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
That's it for this episode of Parenting Adventures. Thanks for listening. We hope it gives you that extra bit of confidence that you need to conquer the road ahead. And if you're looking for academic support to ensure your kids thrive in school, visit tutorteach.ca to learn how we're here for families just like yours. We'll see you in the next episode.